Long ago, when the land of Anglesey was still rough with forest and shore, there lived a young woman called Dwynwen, daughter of Brychan Brycheiniog, a king whose children were many, and whose bloodline would seed saints across the land. Dwynwen, she was not born to rule. She was born to feel, and she fell in love. His name was Maelon Davodril, a handsome, quick of tongue, and bold enough to love a king's daughter without permission. For a time their love was secret and sweet, carried on glances and quiet meetings. But when Maelon asked for Dwynwen's hand, her father refused. Some say politics stood in the way, others say maybe a prophecy. Either way, the answer was no. Maelon, stung by rejection, turned bitter. His love curdled into anger, and his anger found its way back to Dwynwen. Heartbroken and afraid of what her love had unleashed, Dwynwen fled into the cold night and prayed, not for Maelon to return, but for release from love itself. And on that night of all nights, her prayer was answered. An angel appeared, bearing a potion. When Maelon drank it, he was frozen into ice, locked forever in a moment between love and rage. And Dwynwen wept. She prayed again, this time for mercy, and God answered her second prayer with 3 wishes. Number 1, that Maelon be thawed from the ice and released from his fate. Number 2, that God watch over all true lovers, especially those whose hearts would break, as hers had. And the 3rd, that she herself would never marry, never love again, so that others might take that path. And with that, Dwynwen turned away from the world. She travelled to a small little island off the coast of Anglesey, Ynys Llanddwyn, where the sea breathes in and out like a living thing, and there she lived as a hermit, then a nun, and finally a saint. A small convent grew around her, and people came to her not for miracles or fire or healing, but for the counsel of the heart. And after her death, something strange remained. A well. And from this well a sacred fish was said to live. And if the fish stirred when a lover sought guidance, then the match would be blessed. And if the water lay still, then the future was uncertain. And to this day Dwynwen is remembered not as a saint of passion, but as a saint of compassion. Not a saint who found love, but one who understood its cost. And that is why in Wales, on the 25th of January, lovers do not celebrate with excess or spectacle. They just remember St Dwynwen, the woman who loved deeply, lost painfully, and turned her sorrow into shelter for every broken heart that followed. And when the tide is low at Llanddwyn, and the island can be reached by foot, some say you can still hear the sea repeating her prayer. Let lovers be guided. Let hearts be held. Let no one suffer alone. Croeso fy ffrindiau. Welcome, my friends, to the time between times. Hello, my friends, and welcome to the time between times. The time it's neither night nor day, but the sun has gone and the sky is grey. The time when the veil between our world and the fairy world is wafer, wafer thin. And here at the fire pit at the heart of the forest, we sit as the darkness grows. The shadows lengthen, and the moon and the sun share the same sky. But today I am not alone. Only last year, a package came through the post. I opened it eagerly, and inside was a book I knew nothing about. Where the Folk, it was called. A bright coloured cover full of the myths of Wales. I read it in a couple of days. It was full of wonderful stories. And here is its author, my friend, the wonderful Russ Williams. Croeso, Russ. Shwd i ti?
Sut o't ti, Owen? Thank you for having me. God, what an introduction. It made it sound like you had a letter from Hogwarts when my book came.
Well, it felt like that. I love having books come through the post, and this was totally unexpected. And I had a read of it, and I
Yeah,
was it's lovely. I think what I wrote about it in the at the start of the book here is it's a winsome walk through the highlight reels of Welsh folklore, and I stick by that. I think
yeah,
this is a wonderful introduction, especially for people who are perhaps not from Wales, into
yeah.
Welsh folklore, ghost stories, the things that we celebrate in Wales. And you've written it in such an accessible way that people from all over the world can look into what we discover as being really excellent things here in Wales, and yet you've made it accessible to all of them. How did this come about, Russ?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that that's how you see the book because that's what I had in mind, see, and that's the whole reason I started writing it. So it was back during lockdown, and but back when the restrictions were in, we could only go 5, 10 miles, whatever it was. It kept changing, didn't it? So I had to think, right, where can I go now? A bit of a change from Bute Park or Oath Park because I'm down here in Cardiff myself. Um, and I was reading up on the Mabinogion and stuff at the time. And whenever I spoke with my mates, a lot of them would say, "Oh, Russ, I'm Welsh, but I should know these stories, but I don't." And that was kind of how it started. So, two birds with one stone. I thought, right, I'll go for walks in the places where these stories took place, and then I'll write a blog about them and make them accessible for the kind of people, like you said, who are kind of interested in it, but kind of new to the subject as well. Um, and it kind of progressed from there, really. I was very lucky to get a book deal with Calon. And like most authors, they already got a book, right? And then they ask, "Do you want this? Good to go." I had an idea for the book. I thought this blog would be a good book, and they said, "Yeah, go for it." So I had a year then to write it, and off I went. Then they gave me right. We need about 30-ish locations. Off you go, and off I went on my Welsh folklore road trip. And like you said, though, it's brought us together. One good thing, we've been friends ever since you received the book, haven't we?
That's right, yeah, and it was great. As I said to you, I knew nothing about the book. It came through the post. It really appealed to me when I started reading it. And like you, I like to make these things quite accessible to people. That's what this show is all about. And what I've done for the last 4 years with it really is introducing people to perhaps stories they haven't heard before.
Mm.
I mean, it was a really difficult time during lockdown. I think a lot of us went on a bit of a self-discovery sort of a route at that time. What was it that got you interested in folklore in the first place? Was it the book, or was it something that going back many years?
I think going back many years, I've always been, put it this way: my dad's into football and that sort of thing, right? And I much prefer reading stories about dragons and whatever, So I've always been a bit of a nerd, if you want to call it that. I love my fancy stuff. But as a kid, I grew up in the 90s, and one thing that was quite big in the 90s was the Disney Hercules film. Um, and all the kids my age, there were two things we were into in the 90s: dinosaurs, because of Jurassic Park, and a lot of Greek myths as well. So I was always into that kind of thing. I loved, remember those Sinbad and Jason and the Argonauts films from the 60s.
Yeah, I love
Grew up
them.
watching them.
Yeah.
Yeah, classics. So I've always had that kind of interest in myths and monsters and that kind of thing. I didn't think much of them for many years then, until lockdown. And it was through having those conversations with friends that I realized, oh, you know what? Most of us here in Wales do know more about the Greek myths or Norse mythology lately than we do the Welsh tales. So it's a driving factor, really.
It's mad, isn't it? And I think, like myself, what you find, and one of the great themes I like to put on the podcast is the magic on our own doorsteps. I mean, you talk there about
Mm.
having a great knowledge of Greek myths, but perhaps not realizing that there's a ghost in Cardiff Castle just down the road from you. Was that something that
Yeah.
when you started doing this, you discovered a lot of things that perhaps you hadn't heard of before?
Oh, honestly, I was quite, I wouldn't say arrogant, kind of arrogant, I guess, but I went into it, like I said, with this attitude of, right, I'm going to teach these people, what they should know. But as soon as I started, I realized I don't know half of it myself. I knew the handful. I was very lucky, you see, I don't know about you, but I was taught a lot of these tales in school, in primary school, because I grew up in Carnarvon. So I knew some of them, but even then, they were kind of lost, in memory. But as soon as I started with the folk, one thing I realized, you'd go somewhere for one story, and you'd come across three or four others there, and or you've got the same story all over the place, but with slightly different versions, or people saying that they took place in different places, and another thing I learned that a lot of the folk tales came from other countries as well. A couple of thousand years old from Far East Asia and that kind of thing. So yeah, it really, really was a voyage of self-discovery, I must say.
Oh, that's great. And you've been all over the country. I know you're from Caernarfon, you're living in Cardiff. You've travelled to all parts of Wales here in your old banged up car that you always talk about here. Is it Griff, is it the car? Yeah.
Griff, yeah, everyone asks about Griff.
Have you still got him? Is he still with you?
He is indeed still with me. Yes.
Where did you visit? Are there any real standout places you visited that you thought, wow, this place gives me a really good feeling? Or was there spooky elements? Or was there somewhere that you really sort of fell for that you hadn't been before?
There's a couple of places really, and they stand out for different reasons. I, a lot of them, about half the walks, I would say, are out in the woods or up in the hills, along the coastline. So of course they were all amazing scenery, and kind of felt like Lord of the Rings sometimes. Walking over these mountains towards an old hill fort that hardly anyone knows about. It was pretty cool, discovering all these new places. But I learned one thing, for example, Coed Felinhrid. Uh, it's generally classified as a rainforest. So that's one thing I didn't know, that we've actually got a rainforest in Wales. So
Excellent.
that was interesting. Um, and then Llangaiach Mawr Manor. Did you ever go?
I never went that, unbelievably. I went there when I was much, much younger, but ever since I got into storytelling and things like that, it's somewhere I've never performed. And now, as you know, I work just a couple of miles down the road from it, but it's
Yeah.
sadly closed. And I have been there and looked at it outside, and it's just like a dark, sort of sad shadow at the moment. I think it's really sad that it's not open.
Yeah, and like you said, you asked then about anyway that had a particular spooky feel to it. I think Llangaiach Fawr is one of the biggest ghost hunting spots in Britain. I think, and it is a shame that it closed. It was quite entertaining when I went, because they still had some restrictions in. And the staff, for your listeners who don't know, the staff at Llangaiach Fawr Manor, they would dress, in period clothing and stick in character, wouldn't they? But they had to run on skeleton staff, of course, because of the COVID restrictions. So I answered, and the guy who answered, he was like, "Oh, hello, sir. You must have travelled miles on your horse and all this." And then he was like, "Please cleanse thy hands on the way in." and all this. And I was upstairs on my own, and the wall kind of slid open, and the same guy came out, but in a different costume. Be like, "Who let you in?" So yeah, it was quite a fun experience, I must say. And I would have loved to have gone to because they used to run like ghost nights when they'd walk around with all the ghost hunting equipment. But yeah, sadly, as like you said, due to funding, they closed down. And that's one thing. Before we move on from locations, one thing I learned, writing this book: don't say, "Oh, I'll go there someday," because already there's 3 or 4 locations in the book that have either closed down now or they've closed off to the public at least in order to preserve them. And other places, maybe in 50 years' time, the hill forts on the coast due to erosion and stuff. There was one place, there was a cottage, and there was a story about the husband who married a fair at Tylwyth Teg. And they knocked the cottage over now and built a car park over it, just for about 3 or 4 cars, in the middle of nowhere. So yeah, don't say I'll go someday. Yeah, I do recommend, if you've got an interest, go while you can.
Yeah, definitely. And I think having this book with you would be a great guide wherever you went in Wales. Just to have this here with your sort of everyman voice where you're discovering it with the reader. That's what I like about it so much. And there are stories in here that I'd never heard of before that I really sort of enjoyed, and ones that, I had not visited for a long time. And it just made me feel really sort of proud actually when I went to this book. And I'll tell you a funny story in that I was really lucky that I got to write a little dedication in the front of the book here. And as some people might know, I changed jobs in the summer. And I had a leaving do, and all my old colleagues got together and they bought me a gift, and they've all signed a copy of Where the Folk, right? And they said, "Oh, we thought you'd like this, Owen, you'd like this book." And I said, "Yes, it's really nice because they've written all in here, and if you actually turn one page, you will see me having actually written on it there." So they didn't pay much attention to that, but there we go. Right, you visited all these places, Russ, with your book. You've travelled far and wide. You've seen many, many different things, told many different tales. Have you ever seen a ghost in reality yourself, or come across anything, both in your trip or maybe before it?
Not someone else has asked me this before, and unfortunately, no, not on my trip. No, I didn't. I spoke with plenty of people who had, but I didn't experience it myself. And I got to be honest, I've always been fascinated, like I said, with ghosts and monsters and that kind of thing. But I wouldn't say I'm a believer. I'm just fascinated in where do the people come up with this, And but the only place I've kind of felt, what was that? It was in a pub called The Hand in Llangollen. Have you ever stayed there or
No, no.
been? So it's this really old. I think it's got like paintings of like Tudor ladies and stuff in there, and it's this old hotel in Llangollen, and there's a piano by the bar. So I was staying there. So my partner runs this touring business of Wales, and I was with one of their tours, and we stayed on The Hand. And this guy in the beer garden said, "Oh gosh, good luck tonight." And I was like, "Oh, what do you mean?" And he was like, "Oh, loads of people come here for the ghosts." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And he said, "Yeah, the main thing, a lot of people have heard someone playing the piano in the bar late at night when the bar's closed and this." And I was like, "Okay." And then it was just bizarre. About 3 in the morning, I was lying in bed, and I could just hear this kind of ding ding noise, and it just sounded like someone's alarm. But it kept going for about 20 minutes, and more keys slowly joined in, and after a while I thought that's a bloody piano, but it's all off key. It's like someone who can't play a piano, and it was getting, yeah, and then it suddenly stopped. But it could have just been a drunk playing the piano. It could have been someone's telly. I don't know. But because that person told me that story about the piano, I don't know what I experienced. All my mates said, "Well, you didn't go down to check," and I thought, no, but no, I didn't budge. But that's the closest I've been. But that could have been
Yeah.
anything,
Well,
I
that's kind of
guess.
misty. Was that in the middle of the night, or was it sort of early on in the night? Can you remember?
No, like I say, it was about 3 or 4 in the morning. and
Right.
it just kept going. Because if it was an alarm, it would have just been the same tune over and over again. But it was more and more keys joining in
Yeah.
as time progressed. It was really bizarre.
Wow. Well, that's wild. But anyway, yes, yeah, it's one of those enigmatic stories, isn't it? It could have been someone playing the piano, or it could have genuinely been something. Like you'll
Yeah,
never know that now. The hand in Llangollen, you say, is it? That's the place to go.
the hand. Yeah, it's good. It sounds like a haunted pub, doesn't it? The
Yeah,
hand,
yeah, yeah,
and you could just imagine. I'm just picturing the ghostly hands playing the piano now, wherever I
yeah.
think of it.
It's like the slaughtered
Um,
lamb, isn't it? It's one of those type of things, really sort of
yeah.
So anyway,
But what about yourself? What about yourself, Owen? Have you ever come across anything or
yeah,
experienced
I have.
anything?
I've talked about it quite a few times on the podcast, really. But
Oh
I
yeah.
think in my life, I've had probably about five or six, or maybe even more ghostly encounters. But if you put me up against a wall and you said, 100%, what do you believe? I'd tell you, I don't know. I don't know. I had a really interesting one in the police many, many years ago when I was working in the police, and I was driving up the road in the Swansea Valley, and it was about listeners will know this one, but it was about 4 o'clock in the morning, and my colleague was next to me, fast asleep. Keep that
Yeah.
secret. And as we came over the top, there's an old bus stop on the right hand side, just past Abercrave, and
Yeah.
there was an old lady in the bus stop, and she was lifting her hand and waving up and down as if she was trying to stop the police car. And
Oh
being
yeah.
the good officer that I was, I just drove straight past, and I just stared at her, and I can still see her face now. And she had one of those shawls that was almost translucent around her head, and it's quite old clothing, but nothing too old. And I drove literally up the road about quarter of a mile. There's a pub called the Ancient Britain. That's a good name for a pub as well. And I pulled over and I woke my friend and I told him what happened. And he said, well, go back because there might genuinely be an old lady there waiting to flag down a police car. And
Mm,
so I drove back, and it's in the middle of nowhere, and there was nobody there. There was nobody there. And we were out with
mm.
our torches looking. And as we were, another car came up the road, and we looked at it, and he said, "That's a car. We've got to stop." And it had about six teenagers in it, right? About 4 a.m. now. So I
Yeah.
called the car and I pulled it over, and I said to the driver, I said, "What are you doing here at this time?" And he said, "Oh, we're up here for a drive because we've heard this road is full of ghosts."
All right.
And I just thought, oh wow, and that stuck with me forever. That story, and I can still see the lady now. But yeah, it's a strange one, a really really odd one. But
So what made you not stop then? Did
I
she
think
look? Oh, that's definitely a ghost.
one, I thought I was a bit scared. I got to be honest. But two, I think I just looked at her. She looked at me, and you know when you just don't know what to do, really. And that's a
Yeah.
part of me that sometimes the skeptical part of me thinks that maybe I was almost on the verge of sleep. Do you know at that time, and I'm almost sort of nodding, and then well, I see something. I sort of wake up. Do you know, almost like a dream type thing.
Yeah, yeah,
And I
yeah,
sometimes think, that's the only explanation I can give for it, really. But there, enough of me, enough of me. My stories. I'll tell you these stories again. But no, that's the big one. I always wrestle with, really, not knowing what that was. But
yeah.
anyway, Where the Folk has been wildly successful. I was with you in Montgomery last year where we spoke about it in the festival. I know you've been all over Wales, selling the book and speaking about the book and giving good talks. And have you got any other plans? Anything else coming up?
Yeah, well, I am writing another book. I won't say what it is just yet, but hopefully by the time this podcast comes out, I'll know I'll be broadcasting it anyway. But yeah, it's all kind of top secret at the moment. Um, but yes, it's kind of sticking similar kind of vibe. It's not a road trip as such, but it is me in Wales looking at another aspect of Welsh culture and participating in as much of it as I can. I'll tell you that much for now. But yeah, and I think it's quite fun. I've even seen more of Wales after writing the book. Like you said, doing these talks and what have you. So it's been a great experience overall, just in discovering more about my own country.
That's right.
Um,
Yeah, and it does open your eyes, doesn't it? You do realize the sort of magic that's actually on your doorstep. And I think that we live in one of the most magical places in the world, really. And
yeah.
sometimes it takes something like this to realize it, doesn't it? Which is good. Um,
Yeah, and you mentioned there earlier about the way I talk and someone's I've described. Basically, I just wrote it in first person, and I'm not a historian. I'm interested in history, but I'm not a historian. I'm just an average guy with a day job. Um, and one reviewer actually described the book as it's like having a pint with a mate who was telling you about the time he saw a dragon, that kind of thing. And it's a great vibe. And what I think has resonated with people is, the great thing about folk tales is they're for all ages, right? And all kinds of people. And also you bring your own personality into them. So you could be have a dramatic flair, or I'm more of that kind of pub comedian, if you will. That's how I tell stories. And it's really yeah, and I think it worked. People have been saying, oh, all these books for folk tales, a lot either for kids or they're too academic. So where the folk is a good middle ground, I think. And what was quite surprising for me, I got an email from HMP Berwyn, the prison up in Wrexham, and they said there, a lot of our boys ask about Welsh folk tales all the time. Do you want to come in? And I was like, all right, okay. And I went, yeah, my mates are saying you're like Johnny Cash of Welsh folklore, you are. But it was great. It really was a great experience, and they were all very knowledgeable, I must say, and very polite. So, yes, like I said, it's still, this folklore road trip still hasn't finished, really.
Ah, that's brilliant. And to do something like that, you can be quite proud of things like that, where people who are perhaps, haven't got access to this sort of stuff, and to help them in that way is really good. So here we are at this time of year. Earlier on in the podcast, I will have told the story of St Dwynwen, who is the patron saint of Welsh lovers, really, and lovers everywhere in Wales. And I was a little bit reticent to ask you about to tell a love story, but have you got a favourite story? I mean, there's loads of them in Wales where lovers come to grief or something sad or tragic happens. Have you got one that you'd like me to tell?
Yes, well, yeah, the classic doomed lovers tale. There's plenty to choose from, isn't there? But I think one of my personal favourites is it's close to my heart, if you will, because it took place in Nant Gwrtheyrn, not too far from Caernarfon. Is the story of Rhys and Meinir. Do you know that one, Owen?
I do know that one, yes, and that is close to my heart because, unbelievably, and I've talked about this before, I think my journey into folklore began on a sixth form trip to Nant Gwrtheyrn, to the Welsh Language Centre, Cymdeithas
All
Cymraeg.
right.
And
Yeah.
when I was there, I bought a little book. I'm looking for it now, but I can't find it. I bought a little book that is called Rumours and Oddities from North Wales. And
Oh, okay.
in that, it's only a little book. And on the back of it, I think it was £1.95 at the time in the early 90s. And
Yeah.
I've told every tale that's in it. And Rhys and Meinir is one of those. So I'll certainly, if you want to sit back, relax. And anyway, where can people hear more from you, or get in touch with you, or learn more about your projects? Is there anything you want to tell everyone before you go?
Yeah, well, you could check out the official website, russwilliams.org. But I'm on all the social medias as well. But apart from TikTok, I think I'm a bit too old for that one, I think, Owen.
Yeah.
I wouldn't fit in, I don't think, in that crowd. But yeah, Facebook, Instagram, X, all that. If you type in Russ Williams, Welsh author, or Russ Williams, Where the Folk, I'm sure I'll come up.
Diolch, Russ. Diolch yn fawr. So sit back, relax, let the fire take you as I tell you one of your favourite tales, the tale of Rhys and Meinir. There are places where the land opens itself to you, and there are places where the land watches, and Nant Gwrtheyrn is one of those places. You don't stumble upon it, you descend into it. A narrow coastal plain held high above the Irish Sea, cliffs falling away so sharply they steal your breath, and grass bent low by salt wind, sky vast enough to make you feel small, and quiet enough to make you feel careful. This is not a loud place. It never has been. And long before quarrymen cut into its bones, long before classrooms and coffee cups and voices learning Welsh, the land held a story so heavy it pressed itself into the stone. This is the story of Rhys and Meinir, and it begins not with tragedy, but with certainty. Rhys and Meinir grew up here, not near here, not passing through, but here, in Nant Gwrtheyrn. Their feet knew every path before their names were ever spoken together. They ran these slopes as children, hid in the gorse, counted clouds rolling in off the sea. They learned the moods of the Nant and the way the other children learned numbers. They were never dramatic lovers, no defiance, no forbidden matings. They were simply inevitable. So when word spread that they were to be married, no one was surprised. It felt right. It as if the land itself had been waiting. The wedding was to take place at Clonnog Church, stone walls, ancient ground, a place that has heard vows whispered for centuries. And on the morning of the wedding, the Nant woke early. Light moved across the grass, and the sea lay steel blue with calm. People gathered, friends, families, neighbours, voices lifting, laughter carried by the wind. And Meinir, as tradition demanded. Well, Meinir, she hid, not out of fear, not out of doubt, but out of playfulness, a bride hidden from her guests, a final moment of anticipation before she is fetched and found, a harmless thing, a joyful thing. And at first no one was worried. Someone called her name, laughing. Another checked behind a wall, beneath a tree. More laughter, more calling. But time is a strange thing on a wedding morning. It stretches. Voices began to tighten, laughter thinned, and someone said, "She's taking this too far now." Another said, "She'll come out in a moment." But moments passed, and Meinir did not. And the search widened. Footsteps spread along the cliff plain. Names were called, louder now, not playful, but edged. And Rhys joined the search, and this matters very much, because from that moment on, he never stopped looking. They searched the paths she knew, the places she loved, the childhood hiding spots. And the wind carried their voices out towards the sea and did not bring them back. By nightfall the joy had drained completely from the day. The wedding feast just lay untouched. The church doors were closed, and the Nant fell into a silence that did not feel empty. It just felt held. Days passed, then weeks. And then something far worse than panic arrived. Waiting. Rhys searched every day, not frantically, relentlessly. He walked the land with the patience of someone who believes, utterly believes, that their love cannot simply vanish. He called her name into the rain, into the fog, into nights where the sea roared so loudly it felt like it was trying to drown him out. People tried to help at first. Then fewer came. Then fewer still. Because hope is hard to sustain when there is nothing new to find. But Rhys remained, always walking, always listening, always waiting. And months later a storm rolled in from the sea, not a gentle one, the kind that splits the sky open. And Rhys took shelter beneath an old oak tree on the cliff top, a tree that had stood there longer than memory. And then lightning struck, at the time between times, and the crack of it echoed like the land breaking apart. And when the oak split open, carved open, fell apart, the truth was finally revealed. For inside the hollow trunk, sealed away from the light and the sound, was Meinir. Or what remained of her, her skeleton still wrapped in her wedding dress. White cloth turned brittle, bone where warmth should have been. No scream was ever heard, no struggle remembered. Just silence. Perfect, terrible silence. And how did she get there? Well, that story is not answered. Some say she hid too well. Some say she became trapped. Some say panic stole her voice and the tree held her fast. And some quietly say the land itself closed around her. Because Nant Gwrtheyrn is not the place that gives everything back. Rhys did not rage. He did not cry out. They say something in him simply folded. The search was over, and without it there was nothing left to hold him upright. And he died not long after. Not by his own hand, not by illness, by grief, the slow, hollowing kind. And so the Nant was left holding the aftermath. 2 lives ended, a future erased, no curse spoken aloud, no lesson declared, just the unbearable knowledge that love can be lost. Without malice, without warning, and without reason. And today Nant Gwrtheyrn is a place of voices again. People come to learn languages, to reconnect with culture, to drink coffee and look out across the sea. And that matters. It should be alive. But even now, if you walk the cliff plain alone, if the wind drops suddenly, if the glass stills, you may feel it. Not fear, restraint, as if the land is asking you not to shout, not to rush, because once long ago, joy ran ahead of caution, and the land has remembered ever since. And this is the story of Rhys and Meinir, not because it ends tragically, but because it reminds us how fragile happiness is when it assumes it will be found again. And Nant Gwrtheyrn, it keeps watch. It keeps watch still. And there we go, my friends. The tale of Rhys and Meinir. The tragic lovers of Nant Gwrtheyrn, told by me at the fire pit at the heart of the forest, for you at the time between times. I would like to thank Russ Williams for joining me tonight. His book, Where the Folk, can be found wherever you find your books. It is worth a read, for it is full of tales like this. If you want to support the show, why not buy me a Ko-fi at kofi.com/Owen Staton, or become a patron at patreon.com/Owen Staton 7, or read my Substack. That is always worth a look. Take care, my friends. Love is a brittle thing, but may it find you this week for St Dwynwen's Day. A day of days, a day of lovers, and a day where our hearts beat just a little bit faster. No star.